Welcome, everybody. We'll get started in just a minute. Okay, Marcy.
Good afternoon. I'm Marcy Levitt, Director of Literary and Performing Arts at the Alpert JCC in Miami. It is my pleasure to welcome you today. This monthly series is in partnership with several Florida JCC. It has been a joy to work together with my dedicated and creative colleagues. Debbie Hockman from the Posnick JCC Fort Lauderdale, Karen Sepsimwall from the Galbert Family JCC Miami Beach, Stephanie Orwitz from the Adolph and Rose Levis JCC Boca Raton, Avit Erikman from the Roth JCC Orlando, and David Surowitz from the Michael Ann Russell JCC in North Miami Beach. You may see that some of us are wearing pink or teal in support of breast and ovarian cancer today. While planning this series, we looked for important topics and interesting stories to create great conversation and impart knowledge to share with our communities. We encourage you to write your questions in the Q&A feature after their discussion. Jason and Brianna will take questions from the audience. We will attempt to get to all of the questions, but we ask for your understanding if time does not allow. If you have not already purchased your copy of the book, we encourage you to visit our partners at Books and Books and the Writer's Block. We will have the link for the purchase in the chat room. I listened to the audio narrated by Jason, which was very touching and just a beautiful memoir and tribute and love to his wife. 10 days before she died, acclaimed author Amy Krauss Rosenthal had a piece published in the New York Times Modern Love section that was a heartbreaking play on a personal ad encouraging her husband Jason to find happiness after she died. The column instantly went viral, reaching over 5 million people worldwide. Jason discusses love, loss, and resilience in his memoir, My Wife Said You May Want to Marry Me. It is my pleasure to introduce our author today. Jason Rosenthal is a lawyer and the executive director of a nonprofit organization created in his late wife's name, the Amy Krauss Rosenthal Foundation, which funds child literacy programs and ovarian cancer research. His TED Talk, The Journey Through Loss and Grief, has been viewed over 1.4 million times since June 2018. He lives in Chicago and is a doting father to his and Amy's 3 children. Jason will be in conversation with Brianna Schwartz, who is the Florida Regional Director of Charcheret. Charcheret, a national nonprofit organization which improves the lives of Jewish women and families living with or at increased genetic risk for breast, ovarian cancer through personalized support and saves lives through educational outreach. We will list their contact in the chat. Thank you, Jason.
You're welcome. Let me share my screen real quick here. Well, I wanted to thank a whole bunch of people. This is such a wonderful community. So Debbie and Stephanie and Marcy and Karen and whoever I forgot, I'm sorry. And of course, Brianna, I look forward to our conversation later. It's been a mixed bag having to participate in these Zoom events, but I just want to tell you that I'm sorry I can't be with you personally, but I'm really delighted to be with you in this virtual space and be able to reach so many of you who otherwise perhaps may not have attended or been able to attend. And there you are in the comfort of your own home or office, as I am currently today. So thank you for having me, and let's get started. I did want to start by just acknowledging, I don't care what your political viewpoint is or any of those things, but just to take a moment, a pause, to acknowledge this year, which I can't believe I'm saying at this point, but this entire year of all of us experiencing some real tremendous difficulties in our lives. And as I discuss and we'll talk to you about later, it's really a period of time where many of us have experienced significant loss in our lives. And that loss takes the form of many different things, right? It could just be the loss of our normal routines, not being able to see friends, not being able to see family, which has been so important. Um, and some of us have lost out on financial gain, right? We lost a paycheck or perhaps a job. And so I just want to take a moment to collectively, as this community, to recognize that. And of course, um, take a pause to acknowledge that however you feel about all of these things that are happening in our world right now, it is a pandemic, and many families have been affected by a loss of a life. And coming from a position where I have endured significant loss and lived with significant loss, it would be irresponsible of me not to really just take a minute to recognize that. Now, as in everything that's happened during this unbelievably crazy year, there are some silver linings, right? We've been able to communicate in a different way. We've been able to celebrate each other in a different way. And even in the face of tremendous loss, as the case that I went through in November when we had a Zoom funeral for my stepfather, it was just fascinating to observe how people really showed up. And though we missed the touch and the hugging and the collective crying and grieving together, it really was a beautiful moment where literally people from all over the world gathered to celebrate my stepfather. And I hope that in the face of what is really devastating loss, that there are some moments for you as well in the face of this situation. But we're here to talk today about my book, which is called My Wife Said You May Want to Marry Me. It's a memoir written in primarily three parts. The first part of my book talks about love and relationships and family. The second part of the story really is quite tough, and it hits head on some very difficult subjects, such as what it's like to be with someone you love at the end of their life, and how to communicate with someone who's experiencing and going through grief. So we'll talk a little bit about that later. And then the third part of the book, I hope you will find, is a story that's a bit more hopeful. It talks about how one finds resilience in unexpected ways in the face of a really devastating loss. So, what is this story about? Who are these people? Well, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about that first third of the book. It was July of 1989, and I was studying for the Illinois bar exam. And a gentleman that I affectionately called Uncle John, and so did Amy, reached out to me and he said, "There's this wonderful woman moving back from an advertising job in San Francisco. And I know you're studying for the bar, but you should give her a call." And so I wrote down her phone number. As you can see right here, this is an image from my book. Even spelling her name wrong and everything, somehow, don't ask me how. As I began to write the book, I found this Post-it note, which I hung on to. So I went on my first and only blind date. And Uncle John was a gentleman who had dated my mom when she was single, when I was a young kid, and who also was Amy's dad, Paul's best childhood friend. So I took his advice. We went on that date, and at the end of the date, as Amy famously writes, she said she knew she wanted to marry me. Well, me, it took about a year to come to that same conclusion. But quickly we began to really connect together. And at the end of the bar exam, I had this road trip plan, which I took. And so Amy and I learned to communicate in an old fashioned way by actually writing handwritten letters. Remember what those are? I know many of us forgot what they're like, but it's really an interesting and fascinating way to learn about another person, and especially a writer. So it was a wonderful way to get to know Amy. And we quickly fell in love and began to be inseparable. Yes, this is me with a full head of dark hair, unlike what I have right now. But you could see the young love and how we were together. Quickly, as we began to be with each other on a much more frequent basis and spend time together, we did what any young couple did, right? We started two businesses together. Young entrepreneurs, I guess you could say, what are now called startups, I guess. The first one was a T-shirt business, 272 Productions, where Amy was the creative department, and I was pretty much everything else, legal and marketing, etc. And we had just a fun time, getting to spend a lot of hours together, getting to know one another, and also engaging in this fun business. The second business was a button business. That's right, you heard me correctly. We would scour flea markets wherever we were, which was just a great activity to do together. And we'd leave with you know large bags full of these antique buttons and sift through them, pick out the best ones, and we made jewelry, bracelets like this, brooches, and other things. And again, we'd spend hours and hours together, really getting to know one another in this unique setting. And it was a fun business. It was a successful business, and we sold these to family and friends and at markets and things like that. So that year I'm talking about, that it took me to come to the conclusion that I knew I wanted to spend the rest of my life with this woman. So I did that. I turned my father, who had a commercial film studio, into a Parisian scene. I set up this table with a red and white tablecloth, pictures of Paris, a bottle of red wine, some French music playing in the background. And I got down on one knee and proposed to Amy, and she said yes, thankfully. And I got a flavor of what it was like, again, to live with a writer when on our honeymoon, we came up with a list. And Amy, as I write about in the book, was the queen list maker in all facets of her life. But this document I returned to as I was writing the book, it wasn't something that we posted on the fridge or looked at every day. In fact, when I found it, I used it as a theme in the book because I realized that without really hitting it head on, without looking at it every day, it really became a guidepost as to how we lived our life. And a few of the highlights were dinner time. Dinner time was a time to be together. Music in the background was great, but never TV. Never stop learning was a huge one for us, both individually and together. Taking classes, reading, cooking, and traveling, which we did a significant amount of. And this one is really important and has resonated with couples of any age or gender. It was really important to us to reflect back on who these two people were that fell in love before the chaos, the fun, but the chaos of a family started. So we would get dressed up every Saturday night and go on a date just to remember who we were. And quickly we did expand, us Rosies, and these three incredible human beings entered our lives. And so we had 6 years of chaos and fun, and led by Amy's whimsical nature, just a really beautiful, beautiful family life together. And it was after our youngest, Paris, was born where Amy quickly decided, you know what, I'm making a pivot. And she became what many of you may know her as, which is a prolific children's book author. Many of the titles you see here and some others were New York Times bestsellers, and several were #1. She was unbelievably prolific. And when the boys, who are now young adults, when I asked them what they thought about their mom becoming a writer, this is what they said.
I think she's a very good wife. And I think it's pretty interesting that she's wrote almost 5 books. 500. She's an amazing writer.
Well, they're both right. Justin, who's now 28, and Miles, who's now 26. She did write somewhere between 5 and 500 books. That's true. And Justin, of course, was right. She was an amazing, amazing writer. And it wasn't just Amy's writing of her books and articles and talks and things like that. She was the queen of wordplay, which all of us, took up as well. And so when that little girl, Paris, grew up to be a bat mitzvah, we took the entire crew, our family, to Israel. And of course, Amy had to infuse some of that wordplay into a poster that we put on the side of the bus that we toured Israel in. Right? Isn't that perfect? And I wanted to show you just a little bit of a slice of how our Jewish faith and custom was so important to us by showing you a clip of that bat mitzvah.
It's all amazing. I feel new. Do you feel new? I understand when they say we're.
And so I think you get a sense of how important family was in our lives. You know, the thing about it, and the thing about our story in particular, and that perhaps makes it worth telling, is that all love stories, such as ours, don't end up the way that you think they might. And so that bat mitzvah girl grew up and went off to college, and literally the weekend that she first got to college, I got a call from Amy when she was on the road on a business trip. And she explained to me that she'd been feeling a weird feeling in her stomach and called her family doctor, who suggested that I pick her up from the airport and take her straight to the emergency room. And that's what I did. And it was then that we were blindsided by the devastating news that Amy had some pretty progressive and advanced ovarian cancer. And our lives changed forever. And so I wanted to take just a moment to tell you a little bit about this easy acronym to remind you of what the signs and symptoms are of ovarian cancer. And if anybody needs this as a little placard or wants to disperse them to your community, reach out to me and I'll be happy to send as many as you want to you. Now, as is the case with cancer in many forms, we did have a brief period of remission. And so in the summer, before Amy died, we had this epic dance party here at the house in the backyard. And only Amy could shine like this in a one-piece lime green unitard. I want to share a story that becomes a theme throughout the course of my book. And we spend a lot of time watching the news and reading the newspaper, and if you're like me, you just sometimes get fed up with the stories that you hear, because we don't hear a lot of what good people are doing with, to, and for one another. But I learned firsthand that people, when you need them, are genuinely good. And so one day when we were in the throes of home hospice, I had been with Amy 24/7. I was her primary caretaker. And I stepped out to the grocery store for just a mere 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes. It was in the neighborhood, so I walked. And when I came back down the street, it was dusk. We live on a tree-lined street here in Chicago. And so the street lights were illuminated, and it was a beautiful time of the evening. And what I saw as I approached my house stopped me in my tracks, because there, attached to the entire width of the fence of our house, were open beautiful yellow umbrellas tied along the entire width of the house, shining in the light from the street lamps. And affixed to the fence was this sign. And it was an unbelievable moment and made that much more amazing because still to this day, we have no idea who did this random act of beauty and kindness. Many of you know Amy from an absolutely unbelievably beautiful essay that she wrote that was published in the Modern Love column of the New York Times on March 3rd of 2017, which as it turns out was 10 days before she died of ovarian cancer. It was a beautifully written piece. It was funny, which is not easy to do given the subject matter. And it took the form of a creative play on a personal ad for me. It was read, as was said in the introduction, by over 5 million people right away, and I'm sure that that number has increased substantially since then. And it forever changed my life. It thrust me into this spotlight that I never realized I would be in, that I didn't ask for and couldn't have anticipated. And it made really clear that there was this new life that I was about to embark on. And so when I was in this tchotchke shop in Colorado and I saw this particular tile, I knew I had to buy it because it really was very descriptive. And I quickly began to grapple. I was forced really to grapple publicly with some issues that many of us who've been through loss think about. And I wanted to share a few with you. And that is to embrace grief and know that everyone processes their loss differently. People talk to me about grief all the time, and I tell them there is no right or wrong way to flow through this extremely difficult and confusing process. And what I learned by finding my voice to speak about these issues and to write about these issues is that don't shy away from talking about your own loss. I know it sounds sad and maudlin and things like that, but trust me, when you begin to speak to others about these topics, you will get closer. And I can pretty much promise you that when you're in a room, almost everyone in that room has their own story of loss. And then this is important, and this was such a way that Amy lived her own life, and that is to try, as you move forward with your grief, to appreciate the simple moments that life has to offer. And I love this quote that I read in a book by Megan Devine on the early phase of grief, and that is, we need to find a way to talk about both things, the reality of deep, persistent pain and the reality of living with the pain in a way that is gentle, authentic, and even beautiful. So I did that. I really tried to take what was in front of me, which I couldn't control, which is that I lost my wife of 26 years to ovarian cancer. And when I was given the opportunity to give a TED talk, I said, I'm going to write this and I'm going to tell the story in the only way that I know how to tell it. And that is to be really, brutally honest about what I was experiencing, what I think many people go through in this same situation. And right after I gave this talk, I was inundated by folks in the audience who were thankful to me about talking in this way and sharing stories almost right away of their own experiences going through loss and grief. And it gave me the confidence to say, you know what, this is meaningful work and you should continue to do it. And so I found my own writing voice by writing my own Modern Love column in response to Amy's on Father's Day of the next year. Yes, the same title that allowed me to write the book that we're here to talk about this afternoon. I had the incredible honor of writing a book with my daughter Paris called Dear Boy, which became a New York Times #1 bestseller. And of course, it gave me, as I mentioned, the opportunity to write this book and really expand how I wanted to articulate this story. And one of the things I knew I wanted to do on this subject of resilience, like what could I do that was positive in the face of what I was going through? I knew that I wanted to erect a piece of public art in the city of Chicago in honor of Amy, who I really do believe will go down as a Chicago icon. And so, by navigating the bureaucracies of the city of Chicago and the Chicago Park District for 2 full years, we finally had the groundbreaking of a beautiful yellow umbrella made with glass of images of flowers that grow right there in Lincoln Park in Chicago. It's in an area called Grandma's Garden that I encourage you to visit when you're here in Chicago. Just come and sit, read a book, have a picnic, or just reflect. And this is the unveiling with the whole extended family. I've gotten to be a single parent in a way that really gave me so much angst, and that Amy and I spent a lot of time talking about before she died. But I've gotten to know these young adults now in a completely different way. And so earlier during the pandemic, when Paris and I were asked to participate in a video for graduates of the 2020 class, we agreed.
Woo!
And I've gotten to know the kids, like I said, in ways that were challenging, but have been a bit easier because we're open and honest with each other and talking about their mom and about what we're going through. It's not without its challenges, trust me. But I have learned so much from them in the same way that they've learned from me. And part of what happened as I was proceeding through this process is I was asked many, many times, I'm still asked, what is the best way to confront someone who's going through a devastating loss? And I know that this first thing is so simple, maybe, but it's been enlightening for many. And that is to say something. We all know that approaching someone going through loss or having just recently gone through loss is very, very hard. But just to say something honest, like, you know what? I know this is really difficult and I don't know what to say, but I want you to know that I'm thinking about you. If that's all you do, that goes such a long way. It's beautiful. It's empathy. And maybe reach out and say something specific like, you know what? Not right away, not in the first month or two, but when you're ready, when you think the person might be ready. I'm going to come by your house and bring you a sandwich or a beer or whatever it is. I'll be there at 6, and if you don't want to see me, I totally get it. I'm going to leave it for you. There'll always be another time. So that's a nice gesture. And this is easy too. And just to be authentic, be yourself, be kind. And as I alluded to, practice empathy. Also, what I've done in Amy's honor is I started a foundation. I didn't know what I was doing, but I put together a really remarkable board of directors. And I wanted to play you a little slice of a program that we put together during the pandemic, of course, virtual. And it was really wonderful and successful. And here's Paris talking a little bit about it.
Last spring and summer, the organizations Save the Children and No Kid Hungry included some of my mom's books, as well as the book I wrote with her, Dear Girl, in their campaign titled Save with Stories. Here is a short compilation from the project.
Hi guys, my name is Reese, and my friend Jennifer called me and said, hey, would you want to read some stories to some kids? And I was like, yeah, I love to tell stories.
I'm going to read Dear Girl, #1 New York Times bestseller by Amy Krauss Rosenthal and Paris Rosenthal, illustrated by Holly Hatam.
Guess what I'm going to read to you today? I'm going to read Dog, Rabbit. This is a story about two very different people looking at the same thing and seeing two very different things. This story is called Uni the Unicorn by Amy Krauss Rosenthal. I love this book.
No, the rabbit is so hot he's cooling off his ears. That's the sun, and what's that? Fish.
So confronted with a blank page, like many of us who've gone through loss, I recognize and still I recognized and still recognize that there is a blank page waiting to be full. And there will be plenty of darkness within that attempt to fill out that blank page, but try to find the light. Because loss, I know it sounds hard when you're first in the early throes of that devastating grief, but loss can take you to joy, and loss can take you to beauty. That is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Jason, thank you so much for sharing your story with us, for walking us through a little bit about your process with the book. And I especially, as I told you earlier, I finished the book earlier this week, to see some of the pictures of your wife and your family and your journey together was really special as someone who followed you in the book. So thank you for that. I'd like to invite everyone on the call, if you have questions for Jason, to please use the Q&A option on the bottom of the chat screen. But I have a handful of questions to get us started today. Was there a part of the book that you found particularly difficult or challenging to write? And was there a part of it that was just so easy it flowed right out of your mind?
Yeah, it wasn't the first time that I sat down to write about the experience. And so when I sat down to write my TED Talk, that was extraordinarily cathartic. And even as I began to rehearse, practicing that speech, which I know was going to be very nerve-wracking by stepping on the main stage in that iconic red circle, there was so much emotion every single time that a lot of that I worked through, but always reflecting back on moments where it was the end of Amy's life and home hospice, those were the difficult parts. And what was really hard for me too, because it's a really good question that you ask, is opening up my life, as literally an open book. We used to joke with Amy a bit because she wrote 2 beautiful, beautiful memoirs herself. And we always just everyone in her extended family would joke that our life was really an open book because it was true. You never knew what was going to appear in her writing. I mean, so opening myself up like that was a little challenging. If you were to Google Jason Rosenthal before this all happened, you basically would find nothing, and that certainly has changed since then.
Yeah. I see that some of the questions are already coming in. Someone writes, I remember well the wonderful moving Modern Love column. What was the response from readers, and why did you choose the headline for your article as the title for your book?
Yeah, so the first part of the question is probably the number one question I get. What was the response, and also, did you know that Amy was writing the piece?
Yeah.
The answer is I didn't know. I was sitting, right across the room where I am right now, and Amy was working across the room from me on a piece. I knew that. One last thing she wanted to work on. And she would tinker away and kind of take a little nap due to her illness, but also the heavy medication she was on. And then when it was finished, she asked me if I wanted to read it. I said, of course, I'd love to read it. But I never, ever, ever anticipated in a million years the response that it got. Even living with a very successful writer for 26 years, writers of all kinds get rejections, and I didn't know. She knew where she wanted it to be published, but I didn't know much about the Modern Love column, to be honest with you. And of course they published it, of course, but the response was overwhelming, and pretty much immediately. I got many, 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 many emails, but I got many more, hundreds, maybe thousands of letters, correspondence of all kinds, suggestions on woo-woo doctors to treat Amy's illness. I got trinkets and pieces of art that were really lovely and beautiful and came in all categories, from men and women. And the response to me, a total stranger, was absolutely beautiful and overwhelming.
I agree. How did you balance paying tribute to your wife and creating these new chapters, the filling that blank space that she generously gives to you? How do you find the balance in paying tribute and filling that space?
Yeah, the way Amy writes about it, it was a literal blank space that she left in the column for me to find, quote unquote, another love story. But I've used the blank page as a metaphor as I've continued to move forward in my life. And the way I keep Amy in that, it has been unique. Of course, I recognize and I know that. I am able to talk about her because people know about her work and what she gave to so many, many people around the world, not only in her children's books, but like I said, in her memoirs. She's given many talks around the country, creative film projects, which I encourage you to look up on YouTube for no money, just because that's what she did. And so for me, it's a real gift to be able to keep her in my thoughts and in my work, really, and introduce so many people who might not otherwise have known her breadth of work to them. And because, at the end of the day, Amy lived her life in a way that I try to model now, but was so instinctively kind and good and giving to other people.
Absolutely. When you talk about in the book, it really is this beautiful love story that you paint. And how is there anything specific that you've touched on this a little, but is there anything specific you wanted in the book to make sure people walk away knowing about Amy?
Well, I mean, mostly what I want people to walk away from, it was interesting because Amy was obsessed with a play called Our Town, which I knew of, and then I went back and reread. And if you recall, in Our Town, there was a character who dies young and came back to her, I think it was 12-year-old self, and is just observing how people walk through the world. And what she notices in particular is that people are just walking by all of this beauty that goes on. And, with their head down, just focused on other things that they're busy in their lives. And so I think what I'd like people to walk away with is to take a moment to pause and to, like I mentioned during my presentation, to try to appreciate, those simple moments that life has to offer and not just pace through life without really appreciating that beauty.
Talk a little bit about support. You mention a lot in your book about your family being this incredible sense of pillar of support for you, and you had great friends and a community. Talk a little bit about that support, and if you have any tips right now going through COVID, as you mentioned at the beginning of your presentation, community looks different and support looks different. So can you mention a little bit about the support you and Amy received, and then about if you have any tips for those of us that might be going through something like this in today's world?
Sure. Well, I do recognize that I was so fortunate. I had this incredible, incredible family. And when I talk about family, I mean Amy's family as well. We're so close and we still remain close. And I felt a real, real sense of support, not only from Amy's mom, who became my partner in her medical care and, all of those emotional issues that came with that, um, but with everyone else too. And I have, as I mentioned in the book, two friends that I've had since I was literally 3 or 4 years old, as well as a wide group of friends. And so I feel very blessed in that regard. And by not saying or doing much, they were really, really there for me. And I want to emphasize too that a grief or support group is really something that people should look out for. It wasn't my way of going about it, but I did very much lean on one-on-one mental health counseling in the form of a therapist, which was so helpful to me. And my grief group, quote unquote, became uh, other people who not just reached out to me, sharing the experience of what it was like to lose a spouse, but um, I started to pay attention to and read many authors who articulated so beautifully the experience of what loss feels like for them, and that became my grief group. And so I do include some of those titles in the book because I wanted a resource. I really felt that there wasn't really a resource there for me at that time. And what I've experienced throughout this pandemic is how people have extended themselves in creative ways. I often think about what Amy might do. Um, but we've seen it. I think all of us have seen it, how we're there for people, whether it's making a drive-by to an elderly relative, or throwing signs up on your car and driving by to celebrate someone's birthday, or just really, like I said, with my own experience with loss, is to acknowledge the person you've lost and maybe tell a story to the surviving family that they would really appreciate. I can tell you from firsthand experience, I literally still get these stories on a weekly basis. May I tell you a story about Amy? Of course, I want to hear it. So I think that's really helpful as well.
I would be remiss if I didn't mention to the group about a little bit about Sharsharat's support opportunities. And the reason we were able to make this connection this morning is because Sharsharat does support Jewish women and families facing breast and ovarian cancer. And the peer support that we offer to women going through a disease like Amy had, and support that we have for caregivers, and resources and education that we also provide to the community. One of the educational things that we talk about is how to be a caring community. So how to be those people that provide that support in good ways. And you mentioned it in the slideshow a little bit, but we always talk about giving examples, concrete examples, instead of saying, what can I do for you? Because that puts the responsibility on you. Saying, I'm making dinner tonight. Can I drop off a lasagna at 6 o'clock? Or I'm running out to the store. Can I grab you some milk or paper towels? Or concrete examples. Do you have maybe any, like a funny story of like the most ridiculous thing someone said to you, like the wrong thing, so that we can tell people, like use it as an example of what not to say, or maybe the opposite, something that just, you did mention how people text you about the stories, but is there something that was ridiculous, or maybe something just really that you found to be extraordinarily helpful?
Sure. I mean, I expand on this in the book, so I encourage people to read the book. But a couple of things that really just didn't work out were when I ran into an acquaintance, really, someone whose wife knew Amy through childhood and everything. So yeah, we knew them. Our kids were around the same age, and I ran into him on the street, and he just could not figure out what to say, and so he said nothing, and just walked by, and that was just devastating. And then the other thing, which I find a little empty, which you alluded to, is even and I don't blame anyone. Like I said, it's really super hard to make these connections with someone going through loss. But to say something like, "Give me a call when you're ready. Let's go out and have a beer," or something like that, that puts the onus on the person who's experiencing the loss and going through grief, and it just is not going to happen. It's an empty statement, really, in my opinion. But my friends and some people in my community were unbelievable. Even something as simple as one of my good friends did throughout the course of Amy's home hospice experience. Knew we were huge music fans. He and I had attended a lot of shows together, and that's one of the big connections we have. He would simply text me music lyrics periodically. Sure, the subject was love or something like that, but he knew that was a way to connect with me, and I thought it was so beautiful.
Beautiful.
Yeah, and there's some other stories in the book which really taught me how amazing people are.
And if you haven't read the book yet, I really encourage you to. I was telling Jason how much I enjoyed it. So reading, it really is a love story, and he walks you through a difficult subject, but a good read. We have another question from Sherry Rothschild, who is a friend of mine here in Broward County. She asks, did Amy participate in any genetic studies? Sherry's question is probably linked to the fact that the Ashkenazi Jews have a higher risk of being BRCA positive, which is a genetic mutation that causes an increased risk in breast and ovarian cancer, along with several other related cancers. Are you comfortable sharing about any of Amy's diagnosis, and if genetics played a role in her diagnosis?
Oh, I am comfortable, and she was not a carrier. She was not a BRCA carrier. which is unique. But it really inspired me to make one of the missions of our foundation to try as hard as we can to engage a researcher or clinician in the area of early detection of ovarian cancer. Because currently there is no test, and most ovarian cancer is detected in the late stage when it's not impossible, but nearly impossible to cure and to treat. Now, the statistics are, about 10 to 20% survival, 5-year survival rate at that late stage. And so we are doing that. We've engaged a couple of researchers, and amazingly, during this difficult year, we had a pretty successful fundraising event, and we are poised to issue a new grant. And so we're trying hard to do that.
What would you want anyone, people listening, what would you want them to know about living with cancer? How, whether it was through Amy's experience or your experience, what to know about someone who's going through cancer, especially an advanced stage of the disease?
Well, look, I mean, that's a little beyond my expertise, and I can only speak from my own experience and from those who've shared stories with me at this point. But what we try to do is to make, especially when it's terminal, is to make the person feel as comfortable and as loved as possibly can, um, with a sense of normalcy. There's so many changes going on in that person's life, whether it's work or emotional, and of course, physical. Even though that's a slow process, and so that's what I tried to do, is to shower Amy with love and make her as comfortable as we possibly could.
It's beautiful. I I think you've answered all of the questions in the Q&A. I want to thank you so much for allowing us to have this conversation. I definitely would love to thank the JCCs of Florida for inviting Sharsharat to partner with you and to partner on this program. I want to let you have the last word. Is there anything else that maybe I didn't ask or you'd love to share with us here in Florida about your book or about your experience?
Well, all I would love to say is, listen, I really regret the fact that I couldn't see you in person. I'm really grateful to the many people who have attended here this afternoon. And my only request is that once all this clears up, maybe we can get to see each other in person one of these days. And to hang in there, we see some really hopeful signs about the end of the world as we know it currently, and a resumption of some sense of normalcy one of these days soon. So hang in there, and thank you so much, Brianna, for this conversation. To everyone in the Florida JCCs for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jason, for sharing your amazing love story and devotion to Amy's memory. We really appreciate both of you and Brianna taking the time to be with us today. We encourage everyone to please visit our partners, Books and Books, in the Writer's Block to purchase a copy of My Wife Said You May Want to Marry Me. Please find out more information about ovarian and breast cancer on Sharsharat's website, which we have in the chat. I want to tell you a little bit, our next program, I hope you can join us, is celebrating Women's History Month on Thursday, March 11th at 1 p.m. Author Janice Kaplan will discuss the genius of women from overlooked to changing the world. And she will be in conversation with Susan Gladstone Pasternak, the executive director of the Jewish Museum of Florida. Please visit any of the JCC websites who are part of this series to obtain links so you won't miss this program. And on behalf of all the participating Florida JCCs, have a great day and we wish you good health. Thank you.
Thank you.